working for you. This is the 23 News Update at 10.
15 board members and not one is a person of color. The new Greater Rockford Chamber of Commerce board nominations prompt some community members to call for more diversity.
23 News reporter Jake Pearson talks to minority-owned business leaders and members of the Chamber's Board of Directors about what needs to be done to better represent the Forest City.
The new Board of Directors is a collective of nominees from 3 different Rockford organizations. Tomorrow, that board will vote on a new chair and decide if 5 more members will be added.
But I don't think that a lot of Black-owned businesses get the opportunity to be in the spotlight, if you will.
A sentiment shared by more than one African-American business owner.
We are 21.7% of the population here in Rockford, so we need to be paid attention to a little bit more.
To form the new Greater Rockford Chamber of Commerce, the Rockford Area Economic Development Council, the Greater Rockford Growth Partnership, and the Rockford Chamber unite to create a 15-member board of directors.
All the business community is really our customer. That's how we view it.
All 15 members nominated to the board are white, and only 4 are women. Dinez Cochran, a Rockford business owner, says this needs to change.
Those numbers are not representation of what's really happening here in Rockford, Illinois. Minority-owned businesses, both gender and also race, are on the upswing.
Terry Voskuhl is the former vice chair for the Greater Rockford Growth Partnership Board of Directors. He says things got tricky with the chamber merger.
Because it's a merger, we had to take people from the boards. We took 5 people from each of the committees.
He says no people of color from any of the 3 boards signed up to serve on the new board.
In the end, for whatever personal reasons, the people that were diverse in those committees had elected out of the board.
The first Board of Directors meeting will take place Thursday, October 5th. Voskuhl tells me that 5 new board positions will eventually open up, but they won't all be filled at once.
There are actually 2 other chambers of commerce in Rockford, the Rockford Regional Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Rockford Black Chamber of Commerce.